Necessity, chance, synchronicity. Some form of the idea of causality can be found in almost all cultures. In the Far East, it appears in the concept of karma. Through countless reincarnations, the individual maintains a certain identity within the chain of karmic causes. If we can see a preservation of identity over time, it is conditioned by a causal chain that connects events. What we in the West call causality is rooted in the Greek mythologies of Ananka, necessity, Dike, justice, Hymarmene, celestial force, and Nemesis, retribution. These were all revered and feared goddesses. They ruled over the play of opposites in the universe. Thus Anaximander says, but from that from which things have their origin, therein also their demise takes place, according to necessity. For they offer each other atonement and penance for their wrongdoing, according to the order of time. Heraclitus also emphasizes that all events occur through conflict and necessity. In Stoic philosophy, Ananke, or Hymarmene, later became the world law governing everything, even the gods. According to the Orphics, Chronos, time, was paired with Ananke, necessity. The latter holds the universe in iron chains by encircling it as a serpent. She is also the relentless goddess of death's snares. Ananke spins our life's thread and cruelly cuts it at the end. In Christianity, the idea of necessity did not disappear, but was projected onto the natural laws created by God, into which he could, however, intervene through miracles. Only with René Descartes did the idea of rational determinism, in the form of the absolute validity of the laws of nature, become predominant, and any possibility of a new creative intervention by God was excluded. Descartes explained that God does all that we understand. However, this does not mean that he cannot do what we do not understand. He could act differently, but does not want to. God's acts of will are completely consistent with the principle of causality. The same applies to Isaac Newton's mechanics. Even in his view, although God initially created the matter particles, as well as the forces acting between them and the laws of motion, everything now functions dictated by immutable laws, like a machine. From here it was a short step to exclude the concept of God altogether, and so the universe in the age of materialism became a giant mechanical clock that ticks mindlessly for all eternity. The assumption of the absolute validity of the law of causality lasted until the beginnings of quantum physics, when the study of the behavior of elementary particles forced physicists to replace the concept of causality with that of mathematical probability. The behavior of a single particle cannot therefore be predicted with certainty. That is, only the probability of the behavior of many particles can be predicted. Nevertheless, this does not simply reflect our ignorance of physical realities. In quantum theory, we have recognized probability as a fundamental property of atomic reality at the subatomic level. Kepler formulated it. Matter does not exist with certainty in specific locations, but rather shows a tendency to exist, and atomic processes do not occur with certainty at defined times and in specific ways, but rather show tendencies to appear. So, a certain degree of uncertainty remains. Albert Einstein could not accept this at first, and famously said to Niels Bohr, God does not doubt. In quantum physics, another fact touches upon the problem of time, namely the so-called symmetry of the time direction. The two diagrams shown, we've just seen one, and we'll see the next one in a minute, can be read in two ways, either as electron-photon scattering the electrons is represented by the solid arrow, the photon by the dashed line, or as the positron-photon scattering where the positron is represented by the downward arrow. The mathematical formalism of field theory thus allows these lines to be read in two ways, as positrons moving forward in time or as electrons moving backward in time. This can also be read as in the third diagram an electron solid line and photon dashed line approach each other. At point A, the photon creates an electron-positron pair. The electron moves to the right, the positron to the left. At point B, the positron collides with the first electron. They annihilate each other and create a photon that flies to the left. We can also interpret this process as an interaction between the two photons and a single electron. which in time first flies forward, then backward, and then forward again. Thus, the process can also be interpreted as a four-dimensional network of related events, in which, however, no definite direction of time exists. Nevertheless, the arrow of time and causality still prevail in large areas of the material world. One means of finding a general frame of reference for describing protons and neutrons is the S-matrix theory, first proposed by Heisenberg. The circle shown is simply the region in which complicated individual observed processes could take place. A and B are any particles that undergo a collapsing process there and reappear as C and D, two other particles. The theory avoids specifying the particular position of individual particles. It is bound to a number of fundamental principles. First, that the probability of a reaction must be independent of the spatial and temporal arrangement of the experimental devices and the state of motion of the observer. Second, that the outcome of a reaction can only be predicted as a probability. The third principle refers to causality, according to which energy and momentum are transferred over spatial distances only by particles, and this transfer occurs in such a way that a particle can only be created in one reaction and destroyed in another if the latter reaction follows the former. And fourthly, Kappa includes this under the third principle. For values at which the creation of new particles becomes possible, though not predictable, the structure of the S-matrix changes abruptly. It forms mathematical singularities. The latter are indeed consequences of the causality principle, but their location is not determined by it. The logical opposite of causality and its historical root is necessity. Not the root and its historical root necessity is chance. This probably dates back to an even older religious roots and customs than causality. As Hermann Usner demonstrated, the ancient Greeks and Romans possessed numerous gods of the moment. There was a god of the moment when the horses bolt, of the right moment to pull the weeds, to take the honey from the comb, etc. Hermes was, among other things, the god of that moment when a sudden silence falls over the gathering. Particularly important was a god, iconographically related to Hermes, the god Kairos, who personified the opportune coincidence of circumstances conducive to action. One had to seize him by the forelock, otherwise he would vanish. Another deity of a lucky moment was Nike, the goddess of victory. She embodied that mysterious agent or moment when, in a war or competition, the scales tipped in favor of one fighter. Nike was the daughter of the Styx, the circular underworld river, which resembled Oceanus, the river god of time, another goddess of the moment in Fortuna, with her symbol of time, the wheel. A significant pre-scientific attempt by humankind to unravel the numinous mystery of a moment was the aforementioned astrological systems. With them, every day, month, year, and eon had its own god, who bestowed a specific quality upon human existence, actions, and life. However, these astrological gods of time were no longer gods of a random moment. They moved across the heavens in an ordered sequence of time in that temporally structured game of archetypes, whose laws, however, we do not yet know. That these gods do not primarily belong to the celestial realm where people projected them, but to time, is proven by the fact that the Chinese, Aztecs, and Mayans, and Western astrologers invented an additional technique by which one could obtain astrological predictions through an earthbound numerical oracle. One of these, the Chinese Qing, has become famous today. According to its instructions, one can understand the meaning of a moment by removing a bundle of a total of 49 of randomly picked yao stalks in groups of 4. The remainder can yield 4 types of lines, 2 masculine and 2 feminine. 6 such lines arranged in 2 trigrams, Kua, yield an oracular answer. There are 64 double trigrams, which symbolize the fundamental situations of life within the ongoing movement of the Tao, world principle. In the West, a parallel system was developed in the form of so-called geomancy. It works with 4 grouped lines, each consisting of either 1 or 2 points. To obtain them, random groups of pebbles are paid out in pairs, while the Qing oracle was developed into a profound system of existential philosophy. Geomancy remained primitive fortune-telling in the West. In West Africa, however, it was linked to a sophisticated religious myth. Its effect is based on a deity, Fa, who does not have a collective cult, but speaks individually to the individual. Fa is the goddess of truth, the god of truth, who, however, reveals his entire secret to man only after death. He is not a natural force, but embodies God's care for his creation. He is considered the Lord of life and is the whole that calls us to the afterlife. Through the geomantic oracle, he reveals to the medicine man the inner truth of every life situation. From a mathematical perspective, these divination techniques form a complementary contrast to probability calculus. The latter becomes more precise the more cases are included. Its answer is never yes or no, 1 or 0, but a fraction in between. Chance is acknowledged as existing, but excluded as far as possible. In contrast, the divination oracles of Qing and geomancy work only with whole numbers. Their answer is based on the natural nature of the numerical result. Chance is the focus of attention, repetition and averages are not considered. After Jung had studied the Qing for several years, he formulated a new concept, complementary to our concept of causality, synchronicity. He described it as follows. The Chinese mind, as I see it, at work in the Qing, seems to be concerned exclusively with the random aspect of events. What we call coincidence seems to be its main concern, and what we revere as causality remains almost unnoticed. But we must admit that there is something of great importance of chance. We make tremendous efforts to combat and contain the danger and disturbances of chance. However, theoretical considerations often look pale and dusty compared to the actual results of chance. One can certainly assert that a quartz crystal is hexagonal. That's true for an ideal quartz crystal, but in nature we hardly ever find two identical crystals, although they are all hexagonal. This actual state of being was more important to the Chinese sages than the ideal model. The confusion of natural rules that constitutes reality was more important to them than a causal explanation of events. The way the King oracle views reality discourages our causal methods. The moment of an actual observation seems to the Chinese and ancient Chinese to be more of a lucky guess than a clearly definable result of causal chains. What interested them was the configuration that events present at the moment of observation. The principle of synchronicity makes the coincidence of events in space-time mean something more than just chance, namely a peculiar interaction between events and with the subjective mental state of the observer or observers. The ancient Chinese view of the cosmos can be compared to that of the modern physicist, who no longer denies that his model of reality possesses a clearly psychophysical structure. Microphysical events include the observer, just as the underlying model of reality in the Qing incorporates subjective, that is, mental conditions into the totality of the present situation. Causality describes the temporal sequence of events. Synchronicity in China concerns temporal coincidence. The causal viewpoints tell us a dramatic story of how D came about. It was produced by C, which preceded D. C in turn comes from B, etc. The synchronistic viewpoint, on the other hand, attempts to construct an equally meaningful picture of coincidence. How is it that A, B, C, D all appear at the same moment and in the same place? This occurs because of physical events. A, B possess the same quality as the simultaneous events C and D, and because they are all exponents of one and the same instantaneous situation. This situation was assumed to offer a readable or understandable picture. In addition to his experiments with the Qing, Jung observed that his patients often dreamed of symbolic images that, in a strange way, coincided with external events. It seemed as if the external events, like symbols, had the same meaning as the dream images. This seems most likely to occur when an archetype is activated in the unconscious of the experiencer and creates a state of strong emotional tension. In such moments, psyche and matter no longer seem to be separate realities, but rather to combine into a meaningful symbolic situation. It then looks as if the physical and psychic worlds were merely facets of one and the same reality. Jung referred to this unified reality as unus mundus, the one world. Synchronistic events, however, are only sporadic, irregularly occurring parapsychological phenomena. They seem, however, to represent special cases within a further, more general principle that Jung called causal order. The latter states that certain natural facts appear, ordered without one being able to give a cause for them. In the realm of matter, these are, for example, the time law of radioactive decay or the always constant speed of light. In the realm of mind, the psyche, one finds a causal order in such facts as, for example, that 6 is a perfect number. The addition of its factors, 1 plus 2 plus 3, yields the same as their multiplication, 6. We must accept this without being able to give a cause for it. Such arrangements can be investigated and underlie the aforementioned number oracle methods. In contrast, synchronistic events are only momentary special cases in which the observer is able to recognize the third element connecting psyche or matter, namely the equality of meaning between inner and outer events. This form of order differs from the order of the properties of whole numbers or the discontinuities of physics, since the latter have always been present and regularly, while the former represent acts of creation in time in the sense of creator continua. Thus, the contingent is to be understood as something general existing since time immemorial, and as the sum of many individual acts of creation occurring over time. Such acts of creation in time, however, do not occur entirely outside of all possibilities for prediction, but rather within certain fields of probability in an actual acausal order. It is these psychophysical fields of probability that oracles attempt to grasp using numerical methods. Since Jung published his work on synchronicity, developments have taken place in physics that it seems to be come closer to his ideas. According to the aforementioned S-matrix theory, the causal and predictable chain of events also leads to the unpredictable emergence of new particles, these singularities. However, there is still a difference between such physical singularities and meaningful synchronistic events, because we cannot discern any psychological meaning for the emergence of the former. Jung suggested speaking of equality when no observer is present at a synchronistic event to ascertain its meaning. This is reminiscent of I.L. White's statement that in nature, incomplete structures strive to complete themselves. The mathematical structure seems to want to complete itself. This is evident not only in crystal structures, but in microphysical structures in general. All incomplete patterns are unstable and strive either to complete themselves or to disintegrate. Thus, White even defines life itself as a pulsating, expanding structure. Such an expansion could be compared to Jung's aforementioned equality. However, only human consciousness can experience meaning in this. Only it can experience unity of mind and matter. Independently of this, modern physicists have also arrived at the idea of an ultimate unity of the universe and have seen that everything we say about it is a construct of our minds. In this one world, says Capra, every particle contains all other particles. At the same time, they interact with themselves by constantly emitting and immediately absorbing virtual particles. The particles are not isolated grains of matter, but rather probability structures, interconnections in an inseparable cosmic fabric. They are different parts of a whole. What distinguishes the physicist's one world from Jung's, unus mundus, is that the latter includes the psychic realm, or rather transcends psyche, mind and matter. This ultimate reality of the unus mundus is transcendent, that is, it cannot be directly grasped by our consciousness. Synchronistic events are unique occurrences in which the unity of psyche and matter, the unus mundus, sporadically may manifest itself. Now, number seems to have a particularly close relationship to both realms, insofar as it is an aspect of both all energetic phenomena and all mathematical rational thinking of our consciousness. Number is therefore, according to Jung, the most primitive form of archetypes, those organizers of our conscious considerations. In the number, quantity and meaning are combined. But what does time have to do with it? To explain this, we must briefly return to the aforementioned two Chinese celestial orders. The oldest Chinese shamans drew their numerical patterns, the Hotus cross and the Lo Shu square, on two boards, one round, Hotu, and one square, Lo Shu, inserted a stick through the hole in the center, and rotated them against each other, where they stopped and could read the temporal situation from the numerical constellation. The interplay of the two boards was interpreted as a sacred marriage between heaven and earth, as the union of the eternal, timeless order with the time-bound present moment. It indicated, as it were, fields of probability for synchronistic events. The oldest celestial order resembles what Jung calls acausal ordering. It is timeless. The more recent celestial order is time-bound. Their time was a field that bestowed a specific quality upon all events coinciding with it. The field, as the Hopi already recognized, mediates between a potential and an actual chance event. Between the realm of timelessness and time stands the human being who sets the two boards in motion. Here chance and freedom come into play along with their rules. yet the player too is part of the coincidence. Therefore, the ancient Chinese viewed the sage's relationship to the cosmos as a ritual game through which he frees himself from desires and wishes and gains mastery over the cosmos. It is based on rituals performed with one whole heart, and on games to which one devotes oneself with every fibre of one's being. From a profoundly serious, from a pure game, one expects that it will impart holiness or wisdom and bring purification that lifts one from everything. The rituals require sincerity, the games require firm rules or at least role models. The rules are not absolute laws, they leave room for interpretation. The Nobel laureate Manfred Eigen has recently attempted to illuminate evolutions and other biological processes by comparing them to number games. But he sees no meaning in chance. For him there is only blind chance. The latter, however, is a relic from a time of deterministic reality. Chance is perhaps only blind because we are blind to its meaning. Hegel on causality. There it is in the science of logic. The causal relation has come to an end in the concept. The originariness of one substance vis-a-vis another has shown itself to be reflective shine, the substance's action transcendent into the opposite substance. Shine, that just means appearance. This relation has therefore no objectivity. Hence, insofar as one object is posited in the form of subjective unity as efficient cause, this no longer counts as an originary determination, but as something mediated. The active object has this determination only by means of another object, mechanism, since it belongs to the sphere of the concept, has that posited within it which proved to be the truth of the relation of causality, namely that the cause, which is supposed to be something existing in it for itself, is in fact effect just as well as is in effect just as well. Positiveness. In mechanism, therefore, the originary causality of the object is immediately a non-originariness. The object is indifferent to this determination attributed to it. That is, it is a cause is therefore something accidental to it. To this extent, it can be said that causality of substance is only the product of representation. But precisely this causality as product of representation is what mechanism is. For mechanism is this, that causality as identical determinateness of a diversity of substances, and hence as the foundering into this identity of their self-subsistence, is mere positiveness. The objects are indifferent to this unity and maintain themselves in the face of it, but this also, their indifferent self-subsistence, is a mere positiveness, and for this reason they are capable of mixing and aggregating, and as an aggregate of becoming one object. Through this indifference both to their transition and to their self-subsistence, these substances are objects. This causal relationship has been superseded in the concept. Causation suggests that one thing originates in another, but in the concept everything self-originates. This is the mark of objectivity. Objectivity constitutes an immediacy, but causation is a mediated and therefore subjective relationship. This is now the relation of causality in its reality and finitude. As formal, it is the infinite relation of absolute power, the content of which is pure. The absolute relation, manifestation or necessity. As finite causality, on the contrary, it has a given content and as an external difference. It runs its course here and there over it. This identical content, which in its determination is one and the same substance. So causality is in the business of producing effect, and therefore is effect as much as it is cause. But finite causality, as it really is, has a merely given content and exhausts itself in an external difference, albeit its true content is to be identical with effect. Causality, in its real mode, is merely an analytical proposition. In judgment of causation, because of this identity of content, The causality is an analytic proposition. It is the same fact that comes up once as cause and then again as effect, in one case as something subsisting on its own, and in the other as positiveness or determination. Since these determinations of form are an external reflection, it is up to the essentially tautological consideration of a subjective understanding to determine an appearance as effect and to rise from it to its cause in order to comprehend and explain it. The same content is being repeated. There is nothing else in the cause which is not in the effect. For instance, rain is the cause of wetness, which is its effect. The rain makes wet. This is an analytical proposition. The same water, which is rain, is wetness as rain. This water is only in the form of a subject by itself as wetness or moisture. It is on the contrary in adjectival form something positive no longer meant to have a subsistence on its own, and the one determination, just like the other, is external to water. Thus, rain is the cause of wetness, pigment is the cause of colour. These tautologies show that the distinction between cause and effect is externally imposed. Cause and effect cannot sustain themselves as distinct. The form of causality, necessity, is distinct from its content. Contingency, everything is indifferent to its determination as cause and effect, and from this is deduced the idea of original substance, the free, uncaused thing. This advanced substance causes itself, everything has it, everything is at bottom free. Thus, this is true not just of conscious things, but of all things. Yet even if cause and effect are subjective, the form, taken on its own, has a content. The formal content of cause and effect is the dialectical point that cause and effect are different, precisely the opposite of their true content, according to which they cannot be distinguished without self-destruction. This content nevertheless implies that cause and effect are related. Their implicit identity is an immediacy, a substrata. Because of this substrata, a thing is open to being made cause or effect, even if indifferent to this relationship. For example, water can be either rain, cause, or wetness, effect. So, according to dialectical reason, because causality causes nothing, it depends upon substance. Causality is therefore finite substance determined by an external reflection. Substance is the unity between absolute necessity and contingency. Hence, it is necessary that empirical causality be contingent upon force of will. On its own, it is finite substance, a spurious infinity, and finite entities erase themselves.